all of us, right? My invocation during the first day of the conference is that our hope is that you get to know the different facets of our people and our country, and I hope you go home and resume the amazing work that you all do with new connections, strengthened connections, and new ideas as well from the different workshops and the panels that you have attended in the last 2 days. Build Peace is about people coming together to learn from each other and to identify dilemmas and puzzles that remain unsolved, things that we have not probably yet seen clearly, to bring curiosity and openness every time in the discussion. So indeed, it is clear in the different discussions we've had in the last 2 days that the human element of relationship and trust building is key in our work as peace builders, whether you're doing online or offline work. Our colleague Ed Kitoriano yesterday put it rather succinctly when he said that the messenger is as important as the message. And Aliyah further reinforced this, saying that relationship matters. This element has featured so starkly in the last 2 days, but there's also a need for us to realize and be realistic that we have to recognize that in those relationships, there are inherent power dynamics at play. We discussed how to shift power, Deborah's here, to balance it out and to make the relationship more equal. And this is where the tools, the methodologies, the data, and the evidence that we've tackled in the last 2 days become important. But equally so is the question to what end these were developed and how they were used. So we tackled the question of process, who participated, who framed it, and what were represented. So this year, built off the conference, deliberately included climate change, particularly climate adaptation and conflict as a sub-theme. While this is the first time that this is included as a theme, it does not mean that it is something new. This is especially important in our context in the Philippines, because our country is the most disaster-prone and one of the most vulnerable in the world in terms of the effects of climate change. The Philippines has, in fact, it's interesting that we top lists that are not good. So for the last 3 years, we have been registered as the highest World Risk Index in the World Risk Report. So I'd like to invite our distinguished panelists. I'm so happy that I get to talk with two people doing very important work in the Philippines and in Hawaii. I'd like to call on Dr. Mahar and Kiloa on the stage, please. Okay. Again, it's a great privilege to have Dr. Mahar and Kiloa here. Thank you for taking the time today. I know that Typhoon Pepito will hit Dr. Mahar, so thank you for taking the time this morning to be with us. Our other speaker, Dr. Villafuerte, unfortunately couldn't make it today. He's with Pag-asa because he had to brief the president this morning about the typhoon that's coming in the Philippines. So Dr. Mahar, Alfredo Mahar Lagmay, is a professor at the National Academy of Science and Technology and the National Institute of Geological Sciences of the University of the Philippines. He is currently the director of the University of the Philippines Nationwide Operational Assessment of Hazards, or UP-NOAA, and the executive director of the University of the Philippines Resilience Institute. He has received a number of awards over the years and recently received the prestigious Dangal Bantayog ng Katatagan Hall of Fame Award by the Office of the Civil Defense for his significant contributions in disaster risk reduction and management. Kiloa Fox is the president of the Institute for Climate and Peace, and prior to this role, Kiloa held multiple positions at Aloha Care, including overseeing new initiatives serving Native Hawaiians and advancing innovative healthcare transformation. Dr. Fox has also worked with Obama Foundation as a leader and design leader and has served as an adjunct assistant professor and research affiliate faculty at the University of Hawaii John A. Burns School of Medicine, supporting the development and dissemination of alternative medical therapy. Kilua has been an affiliate graduate faculty for the PhD and MS programs in food science at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and has also been a guest lecturer at the University of Hawaii Myron B. Thompson School of Social Work, focusing on native Hawaiian knowledge and values. So those are their credentials. But I'd like for them to talk about their work and the important work that they do. And I'd like to start with Kilua, please.
Aloha kakahiaka. Good morning, everyone. Firstly, in my culture, we thank our hosts and we thank the land and we thank the organizers. It's been a beautiful week to share together. And I'm quite grateful to be here. And I realize the positionality and the privilege for us to be on this stage right now. And so many of us are really needed for so many different reasons, including the impending storm. And so for myself, I too I'm going to rush home in about 90 minutes because I am headed back to the government on Monday morning to ensure we have some of our own policies and work in place for the government, where I will be leading climate change, sustainability, and resilience in a new position for our island. So I think this is top of mind for all of us, and so I just wanted to take that moment to think about where some of our minds might be at right now, and just really center the opportunity and the privilege to have this conversation. As mentioned in that very, very long and quite formal bio, I am one of the contributors to the Institute for Climate and Peace. We are a nonprofit organization that centers our work across the Pacific Asia region, that's been founded and governed and is operationalized by women, by mothers. We are immigrants, we are indigenous peoples, and we are powered by an entire Gen Z and millennial team. And we are firstly very concerned about the climate crisis that is upon us each and every day, and our motivating force that really brings all of our expertise areas together, whether that's economics, law, healthcare, civil rights, and peace building, is really about social cohesion and what those collective bonds look like, and how can that social cohesion be actually like the catalyst for the power that we truly need, rather than many of the power systems that each of us have been probably trained and educated in order to achieve in some kind of proverbial ladder that we know in the end doesn't really exist, right? It's a losing game if that's the archetype that we're using or that we're striving towards. And so our organization, though small, is really looking to dismantle systems by providing much better information and education, and making sure that that information and education is created by frontline communities. We're looking at collaboration and partnerships that are truly meaningful, not unlike the partnerships that have been built to create such a meaningful convening like this, 11 years in the making. And we're very, very invested in policy transformation. Each one of us has the background and the foresight to see that we're not just changing symptoms and applying Band-Aids. The antidote and the true solution is we have to disrupt systems that have been oppressing and marginalizing people for many generations now, and we've simply had enough. And so that's what our organization mission and vision and values are. And so it's really quite a pleasure to be here in the Philippines representing, while the rest of our organization is focused in Baku, Azerbaijan, at the COP29 United Nations convening for the Conference of Parties, where we are Hawaii's one of only two badge holders for civil society. And so we occupy, that privilege as well right now. So I'm thinking of my team and the work that they're doing on the other side of the world.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Mahar. You can call me Nahar. Some people call me Nahar because my last name is Lagmay, so they interchange the L and the M. They call me Nahar Magmay. So anyway, I'm a volcanologist by training. And then when I came back, I've been looking at disasters, helping in search and rescue efforts as well as doing forensic analysis of all of the disasters since probably in the 1990s. So over 3 decades, I've been looking at disasters to learn lessons from them, not to blame anybody, but really to extract the lessons from each and every disaster, because there's something to learn all the time. We've been trying to list that down, and then we try to convert that into policy so that the mistakes won't be repeated. Um, Disasters unfold in many ways, and the lessons unravel only after the disaster happened. So there's really a lot of work to be done, and it's continuing. And that includes climate change impacts and how we bring it to the community where all of this science and information matters. So enough of myself, that's me, but eventually we became part of the efforts of government because we do research. We were lucky that government decided to bring in the university to use the research that's being funded by government and put it into operation. It's called operational research. We were embedded into the work of government in terms of disaster risk reduction efforts. We became part of NDRMC from I think 2014 to early 2017. That program where we were employed or used by government, wherein all of the academic research were put into operation for disaster risk reduction, from prevention and mitigation to capacity building to even monitoring. We put up sensors all over the Philippines. We mapped out the entire Philippines for high-resolution landslide hazard maps, storm surge hazard maps, as well as flood hazard maps. Up to now, we're still using them, and they're still up. You might want to visit it. It's at noaa.up.edu.ph. Because of the work that we're doing, we try to list down all of the mistakes. We have been called have been called, me as well as the group, as disruptors. So I think that syncs with what you said. It's really not to blame, but really to change the manner by which we solve or address problems related to natural hazards as well as the adverse impacts of climate change. So during that time, when we were the flagship program of government for disaster risk reduction, which was from 2012 to early 2017, we were involved in response monitoring. So there are four pillars in a people-centered early warning system. That is the generation of risk knowledge, trying to monitor the hazard events. In this case, in the case of NOAA, we were monitoring the hydrometeorological hazards, which are, as we know, related to climate change. Then communication, we were also trying to address that, improve the efforts of government and all of the people in particular, and trying to build capacity for response. So that was a huge task for us, and we were funded by government in the amount of about 6.3 billion pesos. And some of them became the Philippine Space Agency, some are still existing. NOAA, which is what you termed as Project NOAA. It was a program really, but the term Project NOAA sounded more sexy and catchy. So it was called Project NOAA. And by 2017, it was defunded and it was adopted by the University of the Philippines, became the UP NOAA Center, which is the core component of the UP Resilience Institute. We did not have any nationwide mandate anymore, but we have been helping local government units plan their communities. We help them craft their comprehensive land use plans, their sectoral plans, their climate and disaster risk assessment, their local climate change action plans, and all of I think there are more than 30 plans required by government for the LGUs to craft. So we make them risk-informed and science-based. We try to gather all of the stakeholders to be able to give their vision of what their community wants to become in the future, given all of these threats that we have. and then plan their communities across all sectors, not just for evacuation centers, but sectors of agriculture, forestry, tourism, education, infrastructure, marine environment, coastal environment, and it's through stakeholder consultation, which includes indigenous people, supposedly. We've helped about 30 to 40 cities and municipalities, but that's not enough. Um, we have 1,634 cities and municipalities of the country. And what's unique about what we're doing is that we have been using the NOAA hazard maps. We realize that the historical record is not enough as a scenario to build your plans on. We have to incorporate the climate change scenarios because I myself don't know what they look like. We have to use computers, powerful computers, to simulate those scenarios that can happen in the future, depending on how much greenhouse gases we release into the atmosphere that would contribute to global warming and changes in climate that has consequent impacts on the manner by which we live. So that's basically in a capsule what we do. You may want to find out more about what we do from the UP Resilience Institute website. We try to endeavor to publish everything so that we know that what we're doing are international best practice standards reviewed by our peers. Thank you.
I'd just like to touch on that, Dr. Mahar, in terms of your work on forensic analysis on disasters, because our country, again, has the privilege of being the first one to have 5 typhoons in 1 month. We have so many plans, we have so many initiatives, we have so many projects on climate change, adaptation. All our local government units are required to, have a plan. The disaster office is well resourced. Yet we still have examples of evacuation, massive flooding, massive human cost in terms of the disaster. So what are we doing right? And what are we doing wrong? And what don't we know still? What don't we know?
What don't we know?
Yes.
What we're doing right first. We looked at the database from the International Disaster Server called EMDAT from 1986 to 2022. And when we looked at it from 1986 to 2013, the number of deaths or fatalities from hydrometeorological hazards was on average 1,000 to 1,250 deaths per year. These are impacts from flooding, from storm surges, from strong winds, as well as rain-triggered landslides. From 2014 to 2022, it decreased to 250 deaths per year on average. That, I think, is something that we're doing right. We must have done something as Filipinos, because we have had policies, ways by which we try to improve our disaster risk reduction efforts. And I believe that significant decrease of about 1,000 deaths per year is a big achievement. And that is worth taking note of. However, in terms of losses and damages for the same analysis, it did not change. So the losses and damages actually impacts also the people, because that would hamper development, economic growth. We would not be able to attain the sustainable development goals. So there is something that we need to do to address that problem. And I think the reason why, this is my opinion, I think the reason why we are not achieving that is because although there are recommendations by the Sendai framework of the value of probabilistic risk assessment, that means creating scenarios of floods that are bigger than what we have experienced, rather than pegging your risk analysis based on the historical record, we are failing to anticipate the impacts of the bigger hazards and the more frequent hazards, especially the climate change hazards. We are only planning up to the historical record because the maps that we have are based on anecdotal accounts alone. So I'm not saying that anecdotal accounts are bad, but we need to complement that. We need to complement that with some science. Because I myself, my opinion does not matter. It's the opinion of the outputs of the computer simulations that would tell us what scenarios could happen given that we have climate change threats. And we have to reflect them, mainstream those information into the plans of the community. When I say community, it's everybody, including the people in the mountains, the fishermen, in the entire watershed. Now, when we make that risk-informed and science-based and consultative, things change a little bit because we're consulting the people according to how they envision their community to become in the future, given all of the threats. So yeah, that I think basically that's what I'd like to say about where we're failing, and all of these conflicts are related to development. So if we don't consult, there will be development that marginalizes some sectors.
Okay, so I'd like to touch on the anecdotal points in this seeming. I'd like to for Kaloa to weigh in on this because there's in discussions there's seeming disconnect, the perception of the disconnect between science and knowledge of people and knowledge of indigenous peoples and their structures and their practices. So you do a lot of work on this, Kaloa, on indigenous people's knowledge, practices, and innovations. And can you weigh in on this, on the seeming disconnect between science and indigenous knowledge, between what can be quantified and what cannot, and which one do we find important, at least in the mainstream discussion? From your experience, how do you bridge this perception dichotomy?
I mean, this is a great question, and I get this question a lot. Actually, all around the world, there's this dichotomy and there's this forced conflict, right, between knowledge systems and expertise areas. And I think so much of that I've seen just year after year, my entire career has really been finding a resolution of that dichotomy, even within myself, is so much of that paradigm has actually been placed upon us by, colonial ideas and patriarchal systems that have, to be honest, isolated folks like me and Mahar outside of the sciences. So the fact that we're even here today as climate scientists from our own communities, we are people of color, we are representing the best interests of not only our people, but our nations, right, to the very best of our abilities. And we've also been trained as experts in these areas. I think we are living embodiments that this dichotomy has, again, it's diction that's been placed on us, but right here are two people that live this each and every day, and we are making sure that the next generation is trained up so that they no longer have to feel like they have to choose of which side of their identity do they need to wear today. So many of us put on our hats and different cloaks for protection, for warmth, and for comfort. I think some of us are putting on that role too into the occupations and the workforces that we're stepping into. When it comes to climate and conflict and peace, I come from a place and a positionality that each one of our expertise areas, whether it's lived or whether it's acquired over time, is needed right now. This is an all hands-on deck time. This is truly a crisis that we're facing. And so if it's anecdotal information, if it's storytelling, if it's the way that somebody experiences their truth through practice-based evidence, let's bring it into the dialogue. Let's ensure that those participatory methods for research and action are embedded into all of our principles, into our IRB proposals, and that our universities and our institutions support it. But let's also make sure that we're doing the work ourselves too, each and every day. How we connect with our neighbors, How are we having these conversations at our children's schools? Are we making space for the dialogue within our faith-based communities and the churches that we frequent, right? Every single opportunity there is an everyday action for peace building in the wake of a climate crisis. And so I don't see it as one or the other. I see it as a yes and. And last night I learned a really, really beautiful term, biaya. Right? Am I blessing? Yeah. We call it pomaikai in my language. There are not enough models in this world to predict, to quantify, to visualize through any chart what somebody feels as biaya or as pomaikai. That's something deep in our core that came far before each one of us. And so I come from a place and I come from a team where we're embracing both of those. We're absolutely data driven. I am proud to be an Indigenous scientist. I'm also proud that when I sit with my patients each and every day, I try to dismantle systems that tell me I can only bill that time with my patients in 15-minute increments. When a disaster is impending, it's not time for me to talk about any type of medication or referral for them to go see another specialist. When a disaster is impending, it is my time in 15-minute increments, because that's what the law tells me I have to do. I have to make sure that my patients are safe. I have to make sure that that mom has safe transportation to get her children from school, get them home from school safely. Do they have enough food? Do they have enough water? Does she have diapers to make sure that they may be without for 3 days? In some areas, they may be without for 2 weeks. And so those are the systems that I think we're operationalizing our work in right now. And I think all of this is data points for us to consider as peace builders and as Laura tells me, as artists of peace building, that we can take all of that input in, and then it has a place for strategy for us to make sure it's part of our rhetoric, it's part of our discipline, and I hope it's part of these spaces moving forward, because the time is really upon us.
Yeah. And while on the point of vulnerabilities, we always think about climate adaptation, climate and disaster and climate change as magnifying vulnerabilities. But adaptation efforts can also create resilience and solidarity, demonstrating that actually there's an opportunity for climate adaptation to be a catalyst of peace. We have seen this, for example, in the first 6 months of this year. We had an extended dry spell. We had a drought, a severe one. And we saw in the special economic zone in the Bangsamoro region during the long and severe drought, solidarity and collective action was expressed by communities in the sharing of wells, because they didn't have, as we call here, level 3 water where you have tap inside your house. They would have only wells, but some of the wells have dried up already. And people were sharing, whatever the wells that have water, people were sharing. So I'll start with you, Kelua. What have you seen in terms of your own work? What were the similar examples in your country that this is happening?
So for folks that are maybe less involved in climate solutions, there's really a spectrum, right? So you have climate mitigation. We're talking about climate adaptation. At the Institute for Climate and Peace, we also try to bring in climate resiliency and climate justice. For the purposes of today, we'll talk about climate adaptation, but I want to recognize that this is a spectrum of work, and not everybody is in agreement within the climate space right now. And so for climate adaptation, many of the projects that you'll see all around the world, even in my community, and I've been able to see here, it's infrastructure modification. It's land use shifts. It's the creation and use of new technologies. A lot of that is what is kind of proliferating climate adaptation around the world. We all come from islands, though. So climate adaptation for islands is actually quite unique and specific, and I think is actually a really beautiful story, because islands around the world have come together with this mantra that we are not drowning, we're fighting. Right? Because we know that sea level rise, inundation is already upon us. And so when we talk about climate adaptation, we have to think of place and context most specifically. So for islands, we already have a limited and finite ecosystem that is such a tool for knowledge because it already lends to making sure that we're not extractive and that we're not overly using finite resources. And the last thing that I'll share is I've been able to see this not only in my community, but here. One of the areas of climate adaptation that I believe is the strongest is really around water rights, clean water, and the access to healthy water that doesn't continue to bring the burden of disease onto certain communities more than others. And so that's something that I am very, very passionate about because I come from a community where the water's been dammed and it's been diverted. So our stream and our river in my own community, it's called Ho'ai'ai, it no longer runs anymore. I come from a place where the wells have already been intruded by so much contamination that we cannot drink from our faucets. And that's, people think of that as rare in a place like Hawaii, right? Because you think of it as very lush and green with rivers and waterfalls. And yes, we have all of that, but the equity and the justice around those resources is not always there. And I was able to see that firsthand by going up to the Marikina upper watershed and the protected area and being able to start first at the bottom of the 4 rivers that we were able to cross. You start with seeing the hazards first. You see the rubbish and the trash. My heart broke as you see the quarrying of the rocks. People do not understand that when you rip out the rocks out of the water systems, what you're creating is a rapid prime environment for that sedimentation to include runoff into the downstream communities. Where is that going to be most affected? The Marikina watershed, from my understanding, is the largest tributary system that feeds into the Manila water system. That means it's flowing from up to down in the ways that we don't want it to. When you went further up, when I crossed all 4 of those rivers, what you see is the cleanest, clearest, most pristine water, what we refer to as the po'ovai, as the source of the water that came from the Sierra Madres themselves. That's what needs to be protected, and that's where the community was really thriving at its peak. And I hope to see not only in my community, but also in yours, that more of us will come together so that our waters can continue to thrive and flow and be healthy, so that all of us downstream and for the communities that rely on those systems are able to live, be healthy, thrive, and have peace.
Dr. Mahar?
Yeah. Okay, climate change adaptation is really trying to plan our communities so that we can resist adversity and bounce back the soonest possible time, be able to adapt to all of these impacts, adverse impacts of climate change. And again, it's planning all sectors and getting everybody to participate. Science, when it is not understood or embraced, becomes meaningless. So we need to explain that as well and become participatory so that we can hear what the indigenous people and the locals have to say so that there will be a meeting of minds and better understanding. All of these adaptation efforts that are mainstreamed into plans hopefully can transform into projects, programs, and activities that will lead to development. And that development is very important because as the community grows according to their vision, everybody's happy. And that includes also the sectors of water, health, etc. But basically, all sectors of society needs to be planned with all of these climate change threats. And the Philippines and island countries have the burden of addressing all of these climate change impacts, which is really not our doing. It's the climate change mitigation problem is this release of greenhouse gases and burning of fossil fuels, largely coming from the developed countries, from China, from Europe, from America, from India. And the Philippines, for example, is only releasing probably less than 0.5% of carbon, of CO2 into the atmosphere. And yet, the Philippines being in the typhoon belt, we are aggravating the impacts of these typhoons. Stronger winds, more rain that will lead to bigger floods, and more widespread landslides that become more frequent. And all of these impacts actually accumulate and actually hamper our development. So we really need to adapt and plan well so that the communities will not be just sitting ducks. And we have to adapt, we have to plan now, looking at all of these scenarios of climate change. The Sendai framework, as I mentioned a while ago, needs to or recommends probabilistic risk assessment, multiple scenarios, including different scenarios of climate change, put into the plans of the community. That is participatory. Again, it needs to be participatory because I know of an example in Mindanao. I think this was 2 years ago when a cyclone that was tracking in Visayas and then exited in the West Philippine Sea or South China Sea. But before it made landfall, it dumped the weather dumped a lot of rains in Mindanao, in Cusio, in that was in Suwat, Odin. That was in Odin. And the people that got hit by debris flows were actually resettled from a coastal community because there was development for a resort. And the argument was that they are being transferred because the government or the local government unit is trying to save them from storm surge threats and flooding. But they were relocated in a place that was hit by debris flows that were triggered by rainfall from that cyclone that I was talking about. And many people died in that settlement area, including the evacuation center. And I think the people who were settled were the Teguray indigenous people. And that is something that, you see, has some kind of conflict between who wanted the development, what the impacts were. Is this related to climate change? Mindanao is largely not hit by heavy rains, similar to what hit Barangay Cusio in Datos Masuat. Even Senator Pimentel was saying that this is the first time, it has never happened before. So these are the things. It's really a very complex problem, which is not easy to answer. But what I can say is that it has to be a whole of society. There must be participatory discussions in the planning process. And it must be across all sectors according to the vision of the community and not just of one sector. That's it.
Thank you.
That's, I think, where the conflict is.
Speaking of conflict, I will be self-interested here because we at CCAA have been trying to figure out a more robust causality between climate change and violence. And I remember Alan on the first panel of the first day commented on interoperability, and Pancho also alluded to this, that data sets and the variables captured by those data sets can also help provide answers to other questions. And this is something that we've been grappling with. And we're trying to explore data points. What data points are relevant in terms of climate change? And how do we begin to understand whether or not it can be directly attributed to the cause of the violence or violent conflict, especially in areas that are fragile and has history of violence in the first place. So from your respective disciplines, what data points and methodologies are needed to better understand and establish the causal link between climate-related events such as natural disasters and resource scarcity and violent conflict? And where do we find these? And I'd like to start with Carol.
Well, quickly, try to touch on three. So one that we use quite a lot at the Institute for Climate and Peace is the work of the Institute for Economics and Peace. And so environmental disasters kill 13 times more people in areas with low positive peace than those with higher. And so me and the whole team, we really embrace the positive peace building framework and methodologies because we know that that our vision towards our mission towards greater social cohesion is really wrapped up in those positive peace mechanisms, like the access to fair and truthful information, good governance, our rights and relationships with neighbors, all of those that IEP really promotes is part of our framework that we refer to. I also really appreciate Humanity United's work around proximate peace building. I myself I've never referred to myself as a peace builder. But if last night taught me anything is if good food, if great music, if dancing builds us and we're building peace, then maybe I am a peace builder. That could have been an outcome. It feels like it, right? And so proximate peace building from the work that Humanity United has put out has allowed somebody like me who's been trained from my Indigenous people and traditional knowledge systems to find a place that it doesn't have to be learned within an academy. It doesn't have to be anointed to you by any certification or degree. It can be the work that you're doing each and every day. Maybe it's just the work that I'm doing as a mom that might actually be the most important work that I do in this lifetime for however long I'm being given. And then the third that I wanted to touch on really quickly is definitely around Indigenous knowledge systems that you cannot have without actual Indigenous peoples. And so right now you'll see me quite a lot. Very vocal against large environmental NGOs around the world because you'll see terms like nature-based solutions. You'll see reference to Indigenous knowledge, but us as the people, as the caretakers and stewards of those knowledges, have been completely erased in the framing and definitely without a seat at the table. And so when Mahar, really beautifully just said, quite succinctly, in what for me is a great takeaway for each and every one of us, we as islands didn't create this crisis, right? Same, we as Indigenous peoples didn't create this crisis, and we know that with the increase of climate change and the climate crises, whether those are intensifications of storm systems or the frequency of the storm systems, whether that's sea level rise, whether that is the Atmospheric Association saying that 2014 is already on track to be the hottest on record in the world, and I have to worry about my patients' safety because of the heat index that we have. Not only does the heat index tell me in the next 10 years what we're projecting, but it's telling me exactly in the communities in that municipality where that heat is going to rise most succinctly for us. And I'm actually quite alarmed because it's in the area that we're building all of the newest housing. It's in an area where it's largely people of color, including Native Hawaiians and Filipinos in Hawaii and other Pacific Islanders from the diaspora. What happens when we're planning communities in areas that our data is already telling us that we're going to see these impacts really spike over the next decade? And we have great science now that is able to, pretty surely confirm and affirm that for us. It's really us going back to these Indigenous knowledge systems and making sure that we're planning for the areas and we're planning for the systems that we can continue to care for and steward through environmental solutions, not just nature-based solutions, right? But environmental solutions that account for economic, physical, mental, spiritual, and cultural impacts for all of us to live, not just 10 years in the future, but I hope 10 generations in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Mahar.
Yeah. So it's related to the question is about peace and conflict and what we're doing with the key points that we need to look at. So yeah, I think the point that I was telling or talking about was the relationship between development and conflict. And the development is related to the hazard impacts that hamper development. So we need to plan because of climate change. From the global perspective, when the countries tried to develop their industries, we discovered new technologies that made things easier. to develop and they had growth. We were talking about the Industrial Revolution. We released a lot of CO2 into the atmosphere. So they developed without consulting the islanders, with consultants. And the impacts of that industrialization, which we probably did not want, indigenous people probably did not want. Like it or not, we're experiencing several hundred years afterwards the impacts of that industrial revolution, which is what we call as global warming and has been changing our climate. So that is an example from a global perspective. So it can be also in a local perspective. For example, the development that resort development that I was talking about. They had to marginalize or displace the people who were living in those areas for a resort, in the guise of saying that we're trying to evacuate you from a storm surge hazard area. And then they were put there in a place where a lot of people got killed. Not from the storm surge, not from that kind of flooding, but from a different kind of hazard, which is called as a debris flow, a type of landslide that is carried or remobilized by water. So they got drowned as well, not just with water, but with gravel and sand and boulders. So there must be consultation on what kind of development. And it needs to have participation by everybody, what they really want the community to become. And in terms of just natural hazards, that should be in place. And because of worsening impacts of natural hazards due to climate change, we need to put that also and mainstream that into the plans on each and every community of the country. That's a big task. And of course, everybody knows that development is related to economic growth and the attainment of the sustainable development goals. And it starts from consultation, science, hearing out everybody and how they want the development to proceed.
Okay, I'm now in my last 10 minutes of this panel, but I'd like to give you an opportunity to ask each other one question, one burning question, Kilowa, that you'd like to ask Dr. Mahar and Dr. Mahar to Kilowa.
I think so.
Very hard.
I could probably talk with you all day. I was able to visit your campus earlier this week, and I think my question is because I work so much with young people, with students, with trainees, with research assistants. What are you seeing at the university? What are ways that we can bring more young people into not the dichotomy of the sciences like I was speaking to, but so that they can show up as their whole selves and have a discipline that they're passionate about, but they're also able to go back to the communities, provide for their families, and also be, strong beacons of hope, I think, for your entire nation.
Yeah, what we try to do, I'm a scientist, and I know that being a scientist in trying to communicate what we know is not enough because it's not being embraced, definitely. So we try to use the arts and the humanities to communicate. We have puppets. We're coming up with puppets to tell about stories. Storytelling is very important. That should be in our culture. We make use of music so that because I know that it's very powerful. I know when the Philippines was discovered from a song. It was in 1521 and it was discovered by Magellan.
Yes.
From the song of Yoyoy Villame.
Yes.
Right? What's the name of the song? Huh? Yoyoy Villame also composed the song Buchiki.
Yes.
No. But anyway,
A lot of them are young
songs are
people.
very powerful. We can get the children to sing these songs about disasters, awareness, everything that we want the people to know, to build resilience. to embed it in the culture of the people so that when they act against all of these impacts of climate change and the roots of all of these things, they know it by heart and they move deliberately. Not because of discipline that they are instructed to do so, but because they want to do it because it's part of their culture. We also use not just music, we can put it in the arts, we can dance, we can use puppets, and we try to communicate. And it's a difficult task, but at least we're trying to do something about it. This is learning from, I think, the mistakes that we did not do before.
Can I mean, my heart is literally singing right now. I might burst into tears on this stage of, we don't often hear from volcanologists and climate scientists that we should have more music and that we should teach the songs of 500-600 years before us. And I just, I'm really grateful to be on this stage with you today.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So I think that's the way to go. I mean, instructing everybody. It also builds trust, about the science, about communication. If we open up, we discuss, we share the data sets, openly accessible, empowering people. There's really a lot of lessons that we learned here in the Philippines. If I were to list them down, it'd be more than 100, and it's a long list. Some of them have been implemented, but most of them have not been implemented. Why? Why? I'll let you answer that. It's difficult to implement, perhaps because of interests. I think that it all boils down to that. And the interest will boil down to what kind of development happens in a particular community. And when that kind of interest gets into the planning process, people get marginalized. And we forget everything that we learn, we forget everything that we need to do, respecting nature and everything. And that's where conflict arises, when there are vested interests at play.
Thank you. But do you have a question for Kilo?
Yes, of course. Yeah, you're from Hawaii, and I actually just came from New Zealand. So you have more or less the same, right?
Same, yeah.
The same. And how do you say two? Two.
Elua.
We say lua. How do you say river?
Vai.
By?
Vai.
In New Zealand, will you say like something awa?
Awai.
Yeah. How do you say awa?
Like awai. The if it's flowing, it's an awai.
Hawaii. So, how do we say it here? The river in Tagalog or Bisaya? Is there any Bisaya here? Anyway, that dua, I think something. And I think we share some kind of, we have some kind of link, coming from Taiwan to Madagascar all the way to New Zealand, and all of these links actually bind us together, and we can share the same experiences. And somehow there's been a disjunct already, and we are linked more to the Asians rather than to the people. The Austronesians are separated now from largely what we call Polynesians. But I think there's some kind of link in the past that we can actually share all of this knowledge, what we have learned, how to respect nature, being islanders, how to respect the rivers. You know that there in New Zealand, they have rights. They have rights for the river, the same way that they have rights for human beings, and that is something that I think we need to pursue here in our country, because we just think about ourselves. So, man as the as the people who rule the earth. And actually, we should try to address these concerns about living with nature, as opposed to development, just development, and we have to live with nature and consider everything, including all of the rights of the people and the environment. So, I was there any question?
It's
That
okay.
I just asked the question.
Okay, go ahead.
So, are you
We could
open?
do this all day.
Are you, are you open to like bridging it again, the way we were bridged by the seas in the past? Because I know that our cultures actually have a lot in common because of the oceans, because of water.
Yes. The Pacific philosopher Epeli Hau'ofa refers to us as our sea of islands. The master navigator Nainoa Thompson refers to us as island Earth. I think there's old and new ways that continue to connect us, and I hope by sharing these stories, by sharing our language, continuing our practices, there are opportunities for us to also truthfully examine what has continued to set us back and what has hindered progress. And so for me, it's not been lost on me. It's my first time here in the Philippines, and I'm so grateful. But it's not been lost on me that within the same exact time period, the United States of America invaded Hawaii and illegally overthrew our monarch, our Queen Liliuokalani. At the same time as the Philippines went through the process and then initiated the Philippine-American War. I think what that is teaching me here is that conflict has been upon our peoples and has been separating us for quite a long time, and it has not served our interest. And much of that conflict has centered around industrialization that we were able to talk much about. But I think it's also around armed conflict and the military-industrial complex within this region that has marked so much of our history and the history of our grandparents and them before us. It is not lost on me that this is going to be the epicenter of either the perils or possibilities of what conflict or peace building is going to look like for the entirety of the rest of civilization, for our shared people, in a very, very short amount of time. It is clear on every single international stage that that is where we are heading, and that the beauty and the bounty and the specialness of these islands, I think, will actually come together again and form a really beautiful barrier of biaya and pumaikai that I think can renew an entirely different era that maybe we haven't been able to envision yet along the horizon of our future. In our language, we refer to the horizons in 3 different levels. Ben and I were looking at the horizons last night. If you had gone outside at dusk, the sky was incredibly pink and purple. Ben is from the north with the Global Migrant Workers Network, and I, of course, am from Hawaii. We have those same signs in our skies that tell us a storm is upon us. I don't think the storm is just Pepito. I think the storm, it's a prophecy of what is coming. And it's really up to all of us to ensure that we are going to respond with readiness from our hearts and our souls, and maybe from the songs that we sang when we were children.
Yeah, there's also something good about what's happening now, because it's about storytelling and learning from the stories of the past and what they did in the past that makes us better. We've lost that somehow. That's why I'm trying to bridge it again, because I know that in your areas, the Polynesians, with some roots from the Austronesians, I guess, The storytelling culture is very much alive. And somehow in the Philippines, I think we've lost that kind of culture that goes all the way back to several centuries. Um, and this opportunity now of being able to talk to each other to discuss starts that storytelling process and bridging everything so that we can relearn here in the Philippines how to learn from stories of our ancestors, what they've learned, because that's a lot of local knowledge, which I think we've lost and we need to get back.
Beautiful. What a beautiful session. Please, a round of applause for our participants.
Thank you so much. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Dalawa daw po po yung tawagin. Thank you so much.